A very warm good evening, everyone. I welcome you all on behalf of Bhagwan Sheetalnath, Chair for Jain Archaeology, Department of Ancient Indian History, Culture and Archaeology, Deccan College Postgraduate and Research Institute, deemed to be University, Pune, to Lecture 8 of Professor H.D. Sankalia monthly lecture series on Jain heritage. Today's titled Patronage and Spread of Jainism, Archaeological and Epigraphical Evidence. This topic would be delivered by Dr. Gauri Bedekar, ma'am, and Dr. Gauri Bedekar, ma'am's introduction will be given later. First, let me introduce you to the basic idea behind naming this particular lecture series by the name of Professor H.D. Sankalia and the idea behind Bhagwan Sheetalnath Chair for Jain Archaeology. Bhagwan Sheetalnath Chair for Jain Archaeology was established at Deccan College by International School for Jain Studies, Pune, and Vardhaman Charitable Foundation. It was entrusted with spreading awareness on the ideas of Jain art, architecture, archaeology, heritage aspects of Jain studies. Professor H.D. Sankalia, the establisher of the Department of Archaeology at Deccan College, was very much detrimental in establishing the early presence of Jainism in the region of Western Deccan. His article, along with Dr. Shobna Gokhale ma'am, on the inscription at Pale has led to the establishment and a very well acceptance of the fact that Jainism existed in the region of Western Deccan, archaeologically provable as earliest as the 2nd century, 1st century BCE, based on the inscription that starts with Namo Arhantanam. Apart from that, Professor H.D. Sankalia sir's work not just focused on Jainism, but overall his dedication to archaeology has been inspirational to everybody, and that's why this particular lecture series has been named after Professor H.D. Sankalia sir. The Bhagwan Sheetalnath Chair for Jain Archaeology, for those who are joining in for the first time, let me tell you, is working on multiple projects focused on some important sites which have Jain archaeological evidences. It is also working on the bibliography project, creating a bibliography of all the Jain references. It is also working on providing internship opportunities to students of archaeology and is also running a certificate course by the name of a certificate course in Jain Art and Archaeology, which is a 4 credit course. Without any further delay, I would like to request Dhananjay Khandare, who is the research assistant of Bhagwan Sheetalnath Chair for Jain Archaeology, to kindly introduce our today's guest. You are all very much eager to listen to our today's guest, and the title is also very interesting of today's lecture. So I request him to kindly give an introduction of the lecture.
Thank you, Oshin. Good evening, everyone. Our today's speaker, Dr. Gauri Bedekar, is an assistant researcher at Firodia Institute of Philosophy, Culture and History, Pune. She completed her MA and PhD in Ancient Indian History, Culture and Archaeology from Deccan College Postgraduate and Research Institute, deemed to be University, Pune, and MA in Sanskrit from Tilak Maharashtra Vidyapit, Pune. She is the recipient of ICHR Junior Research Fellowship and UGC Research Fellowship in Social Sciences and Humanities. She is faculty of summer and winter programs of the International School of Jain Studies and is visiting faculty of Tilak Maharashtra Vidyapit and Sinhagad College of Architecture. Her primary interest lies in the correlation between literary and archaeological sources of the past. I welcome you, Dr. Gauri Bedekar.
Thank you, Dhananjay Bhaiya. I now request Dr. Gauri Bedekar ma'am to kindly begin her lecture.
Is the screen visible in full screen?
Yes, ma'am. Yes. Thank you.
Before I begin, thank you for the invitation. It is an honor to speak as part of Bhagwan Sheetalnath Chair as well as the lecture series named after Professor H.D. Sankalia. The subject for today's lecture is patronage and spread of Jainism through archaeological and epigraphical evidences. Jainism is one of the oldest continuous religious traditions of the world, not just India. It has a very rich literary and mythological sources of history and antiquity as well. But for today, we are going to focus on the material remains of this religious tradition in terms of archaeological evidences and epigraphical evidences. The archaeological evidences come to us in form of structural remains and remains of art in terms of sculptures, paintings, and so on. And they are studied through the nature or form of the evidence that is discovered, as well as the context of the evidence. That is, where the evidence has been discovered, the nature of the evidence that has been discovered, and so on. Similarly, we have equally rich epigraphic heritage of Jain literary traditions. We have inscriptions in variety of languages and scripts from different parts of India, right from northern states till Tamil Nadu, from Gujarat till Assam. We see presence of Jainism in form of sculptures, architectural remains, as well as epigraphs. The most common forms of epigraphs that I'm going to refer to for purpose of this lecture are basically royal edicts and donative inscriptions. Royal edicts are basically inscriptions by kings who were Jain by their religious affiliation, as well as kings who were not Jain themselves, but they supported Jainism. And donative inscriptions, which are donations by kings and royalty, as well as their ministers and common household followers of Jainism, and people of different vocations and professions from different walks of life of past society. Again, we try to study them through their context and content of inscriptions, meaning along with language, script, geographical find spots, uh, content as in other references, other glimpses of social and religious and political life that we can glean from these records. Uh, where the inscription have been found, what are the geographical affiliations of the donor or the royalty, what was the geographical spread of the king who made the donation, and so on. One point that I want to make here is that the title that has been chosen for this lecture has been Patronage and Spread of Jainism. Although patronage may have a very patronizing and slightly negative connotation in present day common parlance of today, uh, usually when we refer to patronage to a specific religious traditions, it has two aspects to it. One is a king or a minister or a donor who is of that religious affiliation and is donating or acting constructively to promote that religious tradition. We also have other aspect of it, which is very commonly seen in case of ancient India, is that a person may not be of that religious tradition or affiliation, but they are still making donations for a specific religious traditions, for the ascetics or for the temples or for some work of general welfare. And when we use the word patronage, we generally, what is implied or what we expect is something extra effort that the person has taken for the welfare, preservation, and upliftment of that religious tradition. For example, not all kings who were of a specific religious affiliation made efforts for building or construction or upliftment of that religious tradition, or they may have been even commoners, householders, and people of very limited means who have given considerable donations to a multiple religious traditions for the upliftment of that tradition. Hence, the usage of patronage and spread of that religious tradition. Before we go to about 4th century BCE, where we start finding actual material remains, 4th to 3rd century BCE, let's touch up on the history or antiquity of Jainism according to Jain religious tradition, that is their literature and mythology. Uh, we all know that according to uh, Jainism believes in continuous, endless, circular notion of time, and in each time cycle there are 24 tirthankars or bearers who help people to transcend this ocean of transmigration. The first tirthankar of our present day time, of our current time cycle, is Rishabdev. Now, Jainism talks in astronomical figures and numbers, and the antiquity provided by Jain literature is in crores and crores of years. Obviously, archaeologically, we cannot push back antiquity of human civilization or a religious tradition to this date, and hence, first 22 to 23 Tirthankars archaeologically are considered mythical or legendary figures, and it is generally believed that 24th Tirthankar Mahavir and maybe 23rd Tirthankar Parshvanath were historical figures. But before we reach that point, there are some historical or interesting uh, crossovers or pointers. According to Jain tradition, the 22nd Tirthankar, Neminath, was cousin of Shri Krishna, who is a very important deity in Hinduism, also a very significant figure in Jain tradition as well. And the texts tell us that their fathers were brothers and they were cousins who grew up together. So, on the other hand, the Hindu tradition does not refer to Jain Connect or Tirthankar Neminath as being a sibling of uh, Shri Krishna, but this is a point that if ever we are able to corroborate archaeologically the dating of Mahabharata or historicity of Shri Krishna, that can be used to establish the archaeological evidence of 22nd Tirthankar Neminath as well. For 23rd Tirthankar Parshvanath, as I said before this, the dating and duration from literary tradition is in astronomical numbers. But the texts tell us that 23rd Tirthankar Parshvanath was about 250 or 273 years before 24th Tirthankar Mahavir. So, using these numbers, he has been dated somewhere to 9th century, middle of 9th century BCE. There have been theories by some scholars that the distance between these two was not of this much duration, but he was more of a senior contemporary to Mahavir. But the evidence to study this that is available to us today is very limited. 24th Tirthankar Vardhaman Mahavir is dated to 6th century BCE. Again, trying to establish the misconception that is prevalent in many cases. Vardhaman Mahavir was not the founder of Jainism. He was the last Tirthankar of this religious tradition. Uh, Digging a little deeper in literary tradition itself, uh, the Jain Shvetambar canonical text Acharanga Sutra tells us that parents of Tirthankar Mahavir were followers of Parshvanath and the Shraman tradition, which is a reference that has been used by scholars to establish historicity of Parshvanath, along with an interesting reference in Buddhist literature. This is a reference in Buddhist text where Ajatashatru, King Ajatashatru, is talking to his minister and inquiring about the wise men in his kingdom. He has some doubts of philosophical nature which he wants to discuss with these wise men. And the minister tells him about the contemporary wise men, including Makkari Ghoshal and Ajita Kesha Kambali, Purana Kashyap, and so on. One of the names is that of Niganthanaya Putta or Niganthanatha Putta, which is a term used for Mahavir even in Jain texts. So this reference is to Tirthankar Vardhaman Mahavir, Nirgrantha meaning without any restraints or attachments, and Nathaputta refers to his clan, his Gotra. He was from Jnatrika clan, which in Prakrit form is referred to as Nathaputta. But interestingly, the reference further goes on to elaborate that Nigantha, who is identified with fourfold restraint or Chaturyama Samvara or Chaturyama Dharma. Now, those who are familiar with Jain philosophy can tell that this Chaturyama Dharma existed only till time of Parshvanath. The texts tell us that till time of Parshvanath, Jainism had only fourfold restraints, that is ahimsa, satya, asteya, and aparigraha. And Mahavir was the one who separated aparigraha into 2 points, aparigraha and brahmacharya. So some scholars, including foreign scholars like Jacobi, claim that this Chaturyam Samvara is in fact a reference to doctrine of Parashvanath, and hence Buddhism or Buddhist literature of that period was familiar with Tirthankar Parshva as well, but they did not understand the nuances of this tradition, and hence they have connected this doctrine to Mahavir. And so Parshvanath can also be corroborated as a historical figure. But this still is very much a topic of debates and discussion. One significant point that comes to us from this period and literature of this period from Jain and Buddhist as well as Brahmanical literature is that now there are a lot of names which are referred to in multiple sources which can be corroborated. We have evidences like coins and inscriptions a few centuries down the line, and we know that Mahavir was from the Vriji Janapada. He was from Jnatrika Kula. His mother was a Lichavi princess. We have references to kings of Magadha like Ajatashatru and Bimbisar, who both the traditions make a mention of, although both claim that they were follower of their tradition. We still have a corroborative evidence of a king and a kingdom of about 6th century BCE, which was contemporary to Mahavir and Buddha. From literary sources, it is also generally inferred that Mahavir was a senior contemporary of Gautam Buddha, although both of them were in the same region. Both texts talk about their presence mostly in Bihar and eastern Uttar Pradesh. There are no evidences or references of them ever meeting each other. If we extend the timeline a little further, in 4th century BCE, we have references of Acharya Bhadrabahu from both Shwetambar and Digambar literary traditions, which are the two main subsects of Jainism. Acharya Bhadrabahu is the last person, the last Shruta Kevali, to use the technical term, who possessed the knowledge given by Tirthankar in its entirety. Although the stories associated with Bhadrabahu are different in these two traditions, the Shwetambar tradition talks about a 12-year long famine in his time, and he was practicing austerities in Nepal. And there are interactions with Bhadrabahu and another Acharya called Stula Bhadra, and loss of some knowledge. Digambar tradition also talks about the 12-year-old famine and Bhadrabahu being in Patliputra and migrating from Patliputra to Shravan Now, there is no direct archaeological or material evidence of this event taking place. It is generally agreed upon by scholars that the Acharya Bhadrabahu referred to in these narratives was contemporary of Maurya king Chandragupta Maurya, and Chandragupta accepted Jainism, accepted the life of asceticism in later part of his life, and migrated or followed Bhadrabahu to Shravanbelgod, where both ended their life by accepting the vow of Sallekhana, that is fasting until death. There are some evidences in Andhra Pradesh region, some caves, some fragmentary inscriptions which are still being studied, which have led some scholars to believe that they took this route and they crossed Andhra Pradesh into Karnataka, and this can be interpreted as evidence of route taken by them in their journey. But as I said, there is no direct evidence of this migration. We have references of this tradition being very strong in public memory, but it comes to us almost 1,000 years after this event. And another point, although as I said, that most scholars agree that Chandragupta Maurya was the king who followed Bhadrabahu to Shravanbelgore. There again is no direct evidence to this. The Digambar sources use terms like Chandra Muni or Chandra, just Chandra, or maybe Vishakadatta, who according to some was the name taken by Chandragupta after his renunciation. There are stories of Bhadrabahu and Stulabhadra being contemporary to Chandragupta Maurya in Shwetambar tradition, but Shwetambar tradition does not talk about migration to South India. Now, this brings us to a period where we now start seeing actual material evidences. This is a stone torso from Lohanipur, which is close to Patna. This was discovered close to remains of a structure, and this is mostly recognized as the earliest statue of a Tirthankar. This evidence also points to image worship possibly being prevalent in Jain tradition from 3rd century BCE, because Tirthankar Murti was created possibly for worship. A century later, we have Mathura, which was a very significant center of Jain religious tradition for almost 1400 years. Mathura, as we know, was important for Buddhism as well as Hinduism, and there is a very strong evidence that links Mathura to Jain religious tradition as well. Mathura has a very strong imprint in literary traditions. Tirthankar Neminath has been associated with Mathura. And the archaeological remains come to us in terms of architectural fragments, sculptures, and really significant amount of inscriptions. The most significant archaeological find at Mathura is that of a Jain stupa. Stupa, as we know, are more common in Buddhist tradition, are more famously associated with Buddhist tradition. But we have evidence of two Jain stupas that were constructed in Mathura. We have literary references of stupas in Jain texts. There are references of a stupa dedicated to Muni Suvrat in Vaishali, and there are literary references of stupa at Mathura itself from texts as late as 14th century titled Vividha Tirtha Kalpa, which states that in Mathura a stupa dedicated to Suparshvanath was built, which was renovated in time of 23rd Tirthankar Parshvanath, and again somewhere around 8th century CE. The antiquity of archaeological remains of the stupa at Mathura can be dated back to 1st, 2nd century BCE. This is an Ayagapata, a votive tablet, which is a stone tablet about 2 feet by 2 feet. It was, as you can see, it has detailed carvings as well as donative inscription. This was something like a votive offering made to the site of the stupa. And the depiction here can possibly give us some idea of how the stupa at Mathura looked like. Interestingly, we have a pedestal of a Jinnah image of 2nd century CE. It also has a donative inscription, very clear, easy to read inscription. The interesting part is that it refers to the stupa as Deva Nirmit, that is, created by the gods. And scholars like U.P. Shah have interpreted this to mean that in 2nd century CE, the stupa was already so old that people did not remember who had constructed it or who had commissioned it, and hence they had ascribed it to the gods, that the stupa was created by gods, and which is a very strong evidence to the antiquity of the stupa. The archaeological remains have been dated to 2nd century BCE, cannot be pushed back further than that. It is possible that older structures of material like wood or materials that have not survived existed in Mathura. But the archaeological remains at Mathura go back to 2nd century BCE and no further. Mathura also has some other interesting evidences. This is a panel which has been interpreted by many scholars as that one depicting the dance of Nilanjana. This is a story in literature which uh, which is about the episode concerning renunciation of first Tirthankar Rishabdev. In brief, the narrative is that when Rishabdev was still a king, he was enjoying dance of a court dancer Nilanjana, and she suddenly collapsed while dancing, although she was revived by Indra. This acted as a trigger for Rishabnath to realize the futility of material life, and he renounced his worldly life. The interesting point is this story is found only in Digambar traditions. Only in Digambar literature, the Shwetambar texts do not refer to this story. A depiction of this has been discovered from Mathura, interestingly, along with a panel depicting narrative of Harinay Ganesh. Now, this is a story associated with last Tirthankar Mahavir, uh, which talks about the transfer of embryo of this Tirthankar. The narrative tells us that the soul of Tirthankar Mahavir was initially conceived by a Brahmani Devananda, and Indra realized that a mistake had been made. A Tirthankar can only be born into a Kshatriya family, and so he tasked his military commander or his minister, Harinay Ganeshi, who is depicted as a human being with head of a goat or a deer with antlers, who is also a deity associated with childbirth and pregnancy. And he told Harinay Ganeshi to transfer the embryo from womb of Devananda to womb of Trishala. Now, this episode only occurs in Shwetambar tradition. Digambar tradition does not make a mention of it. Interestingly, at Mathura, we find depictions of episodes from both these distinct traditions, possibly because this was a time when the segmentation of these two subsects was not that crystallized, or Mathura had presence of followers of both these religious traditions or these two subsects of Jainism. We can also find depictions of other subsects of Jainism in Mathura. As you can see here, this is a depiction of an ascetic who's depicted as sky clad with a pichi and one vastra or one piece of cloth in his hand. Uh, this mostly is depiction of an Ardhapalaka ascetic or an ascetic from Ardhapalaka tradition, uh, who were ascetics who carried a piece of cloth which they wore only while interacting with householders. Otherwise, they practiced complete nudity, but while interacting with householders for their comfort or the comfort of the householders and their insistence, this piece of cloth was worn. According to some, this was a step taken to bridge the differences between Shwetambar and Digambar traditions in this at this point. According to some, this was remnant of that 12-year-old famine from Mauryan times, which made it difficult for ascetics to survive and engage with householders and gain enough alms to continue their practices. Whatever the reason, this practice or this subsect existed for a few centuries before discontinuing uh, in later period. And from Mathura, we also have the earliest sculpture of Saraswati. Saraswati again is a deity important to all three religious traditions in India: Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. Again, this deity is depicted with a manuscript in her hand with a donative inscription. Like the donor says that he is donating this image of Sarasai, which is Prakrit for Saraswati. And interestingly, he is making this donation not to gain merit for himself, but he said that I am donating this image for welfare of all. Sarvajananam hita sukhaye, so that everyone should be happy and may good fortune come to all of the people of the city. And that is why this donation has been made. Although many sculptures of Saraswati and depictions of Saraswati in painting have been discovered in later centuries from Buddha, Hindu, and Jain traditions, this remains the oldest sculpture of Saraswati discovered so far. When we look at inscriptions discovered from Mathura, most of these are donative inscriptions. A very large number of Tirthankar images, images of other deities like Saraswati, the Ayaga pattas with depictions of Tirthankars, auspicious symbols like swastika, stupa were donated. And the usual format of a donative inscription is that the person says that I so and so from this place, from this kula or this gana, I am making this donation at instance of or with the guidance of Acharya so and so from this sect or this subsect or from this school and so on. And they also mention their professions in these inscriptions. And we see a very rich and diverse professional threads reflected in these inscriptions. We see donations being made by traders, merchants, and jewelers who are obviously quite rich and influential people, but also from people like iron traders or goldsmiths or people who sold perfumes or cotton or who are just caravan guides or just sarthavahas who engage in transport of trade goods or who are performers like dancers or courtesans or scholars who are reciters of canonical texts known as vachakas and so on. We have evidence of Jain stupa from another place which is in Andhra Pradesh, which is known as Vaddamanu. Uh, Compared to Mathura, the evidence is very limited, very few fragments, few Jina images, few inscriptions in early Brahmi. Uh, Two most interesting bits that come to us from these finds. One is the name itself of the village, Vaddamanu, which is a clear connection to the word Vardhaman, indicating a strong presence of Jain population in this region. Another thing is there is an inscription which talks of a Samprati Vihara of this place. Now, according to Jain literary tradition, especially Shvetambar accounts, Samprati, who was grandson of Ashoka, is credited with great works in building Jain temples, renovating temples, making donations of images and temples and land grants and so on. He is elevated to the same position as Ashoka is for Buddhism, but we have found very limited, almost nil material evidence of Samprati or his contributions or his donations till date. So this vihara named for Samprati from 2nd century or 1st, 2nd century CE is a significant evidence. Although there is no reference that this Samprati is the same Samprati of Mauryan dynasty, but still a Samprati Vihar is an interesting find from the site of Vaddamanu Stupa. From this period onwards, we also start getting uh, image hoards, which are collections of sculptures. Along with Tirthankar images, we have depictions of auspicious symbols like Dharma Chakra. We also have some other images and creations which are like possibly depiction of a Kalpa Vriksha. This horde, the specific Chausa horde, again a place close to Patna in Bihar, has images or sculptures dating from 2nd century BCE to 6th century CE. As in case is it the case with most image hoards in India, it is possible that this place was an important religious center for these 8 centuries. And after that point, these images were buried together, possibly to protect them from threat of an invasion or some other disruption on socio-political canvas. We have found many such hoards buried underground or thrown in a well or buried under a temple or in a temple premises, and for some reason it was not possible to retrieve these images, and some of them, let's say, have been discovered so far. There still might be many more who remain buried underground waiting for discovery. The Chausa hoard has some earliest metal images. The images we saw till this date, right from Lohanipur, were made from stone. These sculptures of Chausa are mostly made of brass or bronze. And as I said, they include Tirthankar images as well as depictions of auspicious symbols. We also have some inscriptions from different parts of India from this period, the most interesting one being one from Orissa. This is inscription of a king called Kharavel from Orissa, who was king of Kalinga. And it is a very long, detailed inscription highlighting his achievements from the moment he rose to power from his coronation and all through years of his rule, the things that he has achieved. Two significant points from point of view of Jainism is that the inscription begins with salutations to arhats and siddhas, which again, those familiar with the Namokar mantra, or for those who don't know it, this is the Namokar mantra, salutation to 5 supreme beings, Pancha Parameshtins, which are Arhat, Siddhas, Acharyas, Upadhyayas, and Sadhus. And the inscription begins with salutations to Arhats, that is, Tirthankars, and Siddhas, which are liberated souls. Another interesting reference that inscription makes is that while accounting the achievements or victories of the king, he says that the inscription tells us that Kharavel attacked Magadha and retrieved the Kalingajina sculpture, which was known as Kalingajina, from Magadha and brought it back to Kalinga. And the Kalingajina was taken by the Nanda kings. Now, Nandas were a 4th century BCE dynasty ruling from Magadha. So, at least 300 years before Kalinga, before Kharavel, it says that the Kalingajina image was taken by the Nanda king. Now, 2, 3 things that we can infer from this inscription. A, that images, possibly image worship, existed in 4th century BCE at the time of Nanda kings, because a Tirthankar image was created in Kalinga. B, it was taken by Nanda kings. So Nandas invaded Kalinga and took back this image. The third thing is that Nandas possibly were followers of Jainism, or at least were sympathetic towards Jainism, because the Kalinga Jina that was taken by Nandas was not destroyed by them, but it was preserved and protected so that Kharavel could retrieve it when the time came. And he has considered it important enough to retrieve the Kalingajina, as well as considered that this was a significant enough achievement to record it in his personal account. The next set of inscription contemporary to this Kharavela inscription comes to us from other coast of India, so to say. It is closer to Pune. There are 2 sites, Pale and Lohagarh, maybe 25 kilometers from each other. They are very basic caves, very simple, similar to this, with very very simple donative inscription. It is the inscriptions say that a person has done or has commissioned or has caused this cave along with a water cistern to be carved for use of travelers. The interesting point is the name of the donor in both these places. This is inscription from Pale, which is located inside the cave, and this is inscription from Lohagad cave, which is located on top portion of the cave. The cave is down here. The donor of both these, the donor in case of both these inscriptions and caves is same person known as Idarakhita or Indra-Rakshita. Both the inscriptions say that this Idarakhita, along with some others, has commissioned these caves and water cisterns for use of travelers. From Tamil Nadu, we also have remains of another cave which was used by Jain ascetics known as the Sittanavasal. Sittanavasal also has a very prolonged Jain presence or evidences of a prolonged Jain presence. We have some very simple basic caves which have been dated to the earliest phase of occupation of this cave, which were used by ascetics. According to some scholars, these type of caves or these type of stone beds were specifically used by ascetics practicing salekhana, that is fasting until death, and these stone beds were created for them. In later periods, the cave was expanded and some details, decorations, and paintings were added. We have inscriptions of 7th, 8th century from Pandya kings. We also have evidences of paintings on the ceilings, very detailed, vibrant paintings, again from about 7th, 8th century CE. Uh, Going ahead a little bit, from 4th century CE, we have a Tirthankar image with a donative inscription, which was donated by Ramagupta. Now, Ramagupta is a very interesting figure in history of India. He is from the Gupta dynasty, but unlike the rest of the Guptas, he probably was a follower of Jainism, and we have an inscription which says that this image of Tirthankar Chandraprabha was donated by Ramagupta, and it is a dated inscription. Hence, we know that, or inscription that specifically mentions Ramagupta. Hence, it has been dated to about 370, 375 CE. From 5th century, from the period of Skandagupta, we have the earliest Manastambha. This Manastambha is from Kahaun in Uttar Pradesh. Uh, Manastambha, the tradition of Manastambha, although in earlier times probably prevalent in both Shwetambar and Digambar traditions, is very much a continuing tradition in Digambar temples even today. Very simple terms, Manastambhas were very tall pillars erected in temple premises so that a temple could be located from a very long distance. If you see a Manastambha standing from a long distance, you know that a temple stood next to it. And this is a very simple Manastambha. We have very detailed and ornate Manastambhas, or a large variety of Manastambhas from places like Devgarh in Uttar Pradesh or Shravanbelgol in Karnataka or Chittorgarh in Rajasthan, which has a very beautiful Kirti Stambha. This is a very simple Manastambha and is the earliest evidence of a Manastambha that we have found. It has an inscription which records that this Manastambha was created during the time of the Gupta. It has images of Tirthankar on 4 sides on the top and image of Parshvanath on one side at the base of the sculpture. From 5th century, again Gupta period, we have another interesting inscription, which is a copper plate discovered from Paharpur, which is in present day Bangladesh. A few centuries after this, Paharpur would be developed as a site of a monastery of Buddhist tradition. But in this period, in 5th century CE, it was possibly a place of worship of Jaina tradition. And the inscription tells us that a donation was made by a Brahmana couple, and uh, for this vihara, which was presided by Acharya Gahanandi, who was from Panchastupa Nikaya, probably a subsect or probably a mode of worship. There are references of Panchastupa Nikaya in textual traditions, especially some Shwetambar texts of later period of 5th, 6th century CE. And the inscription tells us that uh, vihara that was presided over by this Acharya and his disciples, and a donation was made to this place. From the same time period, we have another cave from Bihar region, Rajgir, Nalanda region, which is the Sonbhandar cave on Vaibhargiri hill. Now, the cave is very simple with some sculpture or with some carvings and with some inscriptions of slightly later date. But what is interesting is that from the same hill, not inside this cave, but from the same hill, same complex, we have an image dated to 5th century CE, excuse me, which is the earliest Tirthankar image with cognizance. The Tirthankar images that have been discovered till this date are very simple, basic Tirthankar images. Tirthankars are not depicted with any paraphernalia or with any other iconography that can be used to identify them. In some cases, like in case of Rishabdev, the Tirthankar image is usually depicted with hair locks. But besides that, it is nearly impossible to identify or distinguish between image of one Tirthankar from another unless there is an inscription specifying the name or there is a cognizance, but this practice starts only in 5th century CE. The texts of 6th, 7th century also start giving us lists of cognizances of these Tirthankaras. And here we have image of Neminath, which can be so identified with the carvings of two conch shells or Shankha, which is cognizance of Neminath. And this is a depiction of a Shankha Purusha personification, Chakra Purusha personification of Dharma Chakra that have been depicted on the lion throne. From 5th century, we have an interesting inscription from Karnataka region from Kadamba king known as Mrugeshavarman. This is a simple donative inscription. He is saying that he has donated a place or a temple which is to be used by worship for the following sects or subsects of Jainism. This inscription tells us again a few significant things. One, that at least four subsects of Jainism were prevalent in Karnataka during the rule of Mrigeshavarman. They all practiced image worship, and the relations between them were cordial or harmonious enough that they could share a single place of worship amongst them. Uh, Considering the names of these subsects mentions, the first is Nirgranthas, which probably refers to the Digambaras who were sky clad, who did not have any clothing or any possessions. Shvetapatas is probably a reference to Shvetambaras. Yapaniyas, we have a very strong literary presence of Yapaniya sects. Many significant acharyas were of Yapaniya affiliation, and it existed up till 8th, 9th century maybe, after which it appears to have merged with Digambar tradition. and Kurchakas, which is a lesser known subsect of Jainism. We have very limited information about this subsect. 5th century itself is the beginning of another culture horde of Jain images. This horde was discovered at a place called Akota, which is very close to Baroda in Gujarat. Uh, this is a very rich sculpture hold, about 68 images of Tirthankaras, uh, deities like Ambika, and other objects like a puja, a lamp used for worship, and so on, were discovered as part of this hoard. These sculptures date from 5th to 12th centuries Common Era. So uh, maybe what we can infer from this is that Akota was an important center of worship for these centuries, and somewhere about 11th, 12th century, this hoard or these images were buried to protect them from either foreign invasions or some form of political unrest. Although some very beautiful and amazing examples of sculptures and bronze art are found in this Akota hoard, we're going to look at two very interesting and significant sculptures that are part of this hoard. One is the earliest clad image of a Tirthankar. Till this point, till 5th century CE, almost all the images, or rather all the images of Tirthankaras are depicted as sky-clad, as nude, as in Digambara form. Possibly even in the Shwetambar tradition or affiliation, or in early sculptural depictions of Shwetambar followers, the Tirthankars were depicted as sky-clad. This image of Rishabdev from 5th century, the image has an inscription on its pedestal, and hence we can identify that this is image of a Tirthankar Rishabdev donated by a person. And as you can see, it has been depicted with or wearing a lower garment. In late medieval texts of about 13th, 14th century, we find references of clashes between Digambar and Shwetambar traditions, and a reference that a deliberate decision was made to show Tirthankar images wearing lower garments to avoid conflicts between ownership of a temple, or whether the temple was Shwetambar or Digambar affiliation. The Shwetambars took a collective decision that the depictions or the Tirthankars would be depicted with lower garments. But this is a later period reference. We don't know if this was the origin story behind beginning of clad images of Tirthankaras. Another interesting image from this hoard is one that of Jivanta Swami. Again, this is an image with inscription, so we know that this is a Jivanta Swami Pratima of Mahavir. We find references of this concept in literature, especially Shwetambar tradition, where the texts tell us that Mahavir, although he was a prince, he was inclined towards renunciatory tendencies from quite a young age, and while he was 28 years old, his parents passed away. And so he went to his older brother, who was the king, and requested his permission to renounce the worldly life. His older brother told him that to wait for some time because he was saddened by passing away of their parents and he needed his brother with him to cope with the grief. Mahavir agreed and remained a householder for 2 more years before turning 30, at which age he renounced. But because he was already detached from material lives and possessions, the text tells us that while he was still a prince, he was standing in meditation in a palace and he was seen by a passing deity, and who caused this or who commissioned this image to be made originally from a type of chandan wood, a Goshirsha Chandan Murti of Jivanta Swami Pratima. And this is a bronze image. This, as you can see here, Mahavir is shown with all the paraphernalia associated with a prince, And as the inscription tells us, this is the Jivantaswami Pratima of Mahavir. Although this is the earliest Jivantaswami Pratima and associated with Mahavir, in later period we also find Jivantaswami Pratimas of other Tirthankars like Munisubra, but they don't start appearing till 11th, 12th centuries and so on. 6th century CE, we have Badami Jain cave. Badami is a cave complex. It has 4 caves, one of which is Jain in affiliation. The cave has detailed intricate sculptures inside of Tirthankars, of Parshvanath, of Bahubali. Although we have evidences of early caves with inscriptions which were donated by Jain followers, which were for use of Jain ascetics. We also have caves which have carvings of Tirthankars inside, but this cave specifically was carved as a cave temple. It has a sanctum sanctorum inside it, and it has image of Tirthankar Mahavir inside the sanctum. This is the earliest evidence of temple dedicated to Mahavir that we have discovered so far. Again, before this period, there might have been temples constructed from material like wood which have not survived, but this is the earliest Mahavir temple that we find evidences of. Quite close to it, 7th century, we have Meguti temple, Aihole, also in Karnataka. This temple has a very long inscription by a person called Ravi Kirti, who was minister of Chalukya king Pulakeshi II. Although Pulakeshi was not Jain, the minister Ravi Kirti was Jain, and content-wise, the inscription is a eulogy of the king of the Pulakeshi, but the inscription begins with salutation to Jinnahs because the composer, the minister, was a Jain himself. Interestingly, the inscription also has a reference to the Mahabharata war. While recording the dates, the Ravi Kirti is saying that this inscription is being written so many years after the rule, into the rule of Pulakeshi II, so many years of Shaka era, and so many years after the Mahabharata war took place. This brings us to Shravan Belgol. As I said, that a story associated with Acharya Bhadrabahu in the Gambar tradition is that he migrated from Pataliputra to Shravanbelgol. We don't have any direct evidences of it closer to the actual event taking place, that is 4th century BCE. But we have epigraphic record of this migration, which talks about Acharya Bhadrabahu along with his disciples and many followers migrating to Shravanbelgol from Pataliputra from 7th century CE. So the memory or the imprint of this idea was so strong in the population of Shravanbelgol that this has been recorded, although 1,000 years after the event, in form of this inscription. The inscription also refers to the 12-year-long famine and Bhadrabahu guiding his followers to migrate to southern part of India. We also have depictions of this, although this comes slightly later from 12th century CE from Chandragupta Vasadi. We have 2 panels like this on 2 sides of doorway of the temple, which have an episodic narrative of journey of the king and Bhadrabahu from Pataliputra to Shravanbelgol. In 10th century, in the Shravanbelgol itself, the religious significance of the place continues. We have creation of the huge monolithic statue of Bahubali commissioned by Chavundarai, who was minister of 4 Ganga kings. And he was a very accomplished person. He was a great minister, a great warrior. He's also credited with composition of some important Jain religious works. and he is the person who commissioned, which was of the largest monolithic sculptures of that time, the world. This brings us to the period which is closer to the golden age of temple architecture in India. We have Khajuraho temple, Jain temples with inscription, along with Hindu temples. We have a complex of 5 Jain temples at the site of Khajuraho, and they have an inscription that they were commissioned by a trader named Pahila, who was also commended by the Danga kings, who were the rulers, or the king Danga, who was Chandela ruler of this place. And after this point in southern India, we have temples like Brahmajinala Lakundi, which is associated with Shantala Devi, who was daughter-in-law of a minister of Kalyani Chalukya king, and who was known as Dana Chintamani because of a large number of donations made by her in terms of temples and manuscript copies, so on. We also have quite a large number of Jain temples from Hoysala rule. Almost one-third temples commissioned during the Hoysala reign or by the Hoysala kings are Jain temples, which brings us to the next era in Jain architectural and archaeological and material remains, which is that of Jain pilgrimage centers. After this period, we also have a much stronger and wider footprint of Jain temples, inscriptions, and pilgrimage centers all over India. We have standalone temples like Ranakpur, which are slightly later, but we also have pilgrimage centers or places or temple cities, which were places so auspicious that not just uh, one or a few temples, but in case of Shatrunjaya or Palitana, thousands of temples were built in close proximity. We have centers like Palitana, Abu in western India. We have places like Muktagiri in central India. We have places like Shravan Belgod in South India beginning to evolve as pilgrimage centers. We also have a very rich tradition of pilgrimages where the traders or influential people of community sponsored pilgrimages for a large number of people, and we have very detailed descriptions of these events from contemporary literature as well. And so I'm going to stop my journey through antiquity of Jainism through archaeological and epigraphic records here, because from 11th century onwards we have, as I said, a very strong and widespread footprint of Jain material remains of Jain religious traditions. Thank you very much for listening patiently, and I think we can take a few questions.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for this wonderful review of all the Jain archaeological and epigraphical sources for understanding patronage and spread of Jainism from the early period till very recent times that you have covered. So it was a very good review, and I'm very hopeful that the participants may have benefited from it. There are a few questions, so I'll read the questions for you.
Sure.
Swati Pugliaji is asking, what are the methodological challenges in interpreting archaeological and epigraphical evidence for Jain patronage, and how have recent discoveries modified the older views?
Methodologically, the very first point is that these archaeological remains or even these inscriptions were not created with the point of view of giving us insights into the history. A person is simply declaring his donation that I, so and so, coming from this region, I am making this donation because I believe in this religious faith. Now we are trying to extract information of where the person has come from, what is his or her profession, what is their religious affiliation, and why they have done it. So it is based a quite large part on interpretations. When it comes to archaeological materials, it is by definition fragmentary in nature. So when we see remains of a structure, foundation of a structure, and we discover a few sculptures in association with that foundation, we interpret it to mean that this was probably a place of worship where the sculptures that have been discovered were worshipped in that place. It is always possible that the reality might have been something different than this. When it comes to new discoveries, changing our perspectives, I have to say that a lot of scholars have been working diligently into discovering footprints of Jain religious tradition for quite a long time. So there are not that many groundbreaking discoveries these days. There have been some for sure. When the stupa at Mathura was discovered, Jain stupa was a new and fascinating thing which people were not that aware of. But even today, we are discovering things which are extending our knowledge of geographical spread and antiquity of Jain presence. One of the very recent examples is that of the Lohagarh cave inscription, which was discovered. The Pale inscription is known to scholars for many decades now, but discovery of the Lohagarh inscription with the same donor as that of Pale is barely a decade old.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for briskly answering the question. The next question by the same participant is, if we compare the archaeological evidence of Jainism's spread in North India vis-a-vis South India, do we see any separate patterns of patronage emerging from this comparison?
Rather than separate patterns of patronage, I would say that, as is the case of all religious tradition and all types of evidence, the temples and evidence in general of this nature has been preserved better in southern India, because North India has seen more political turmoil, more foreign invasions, more destruction of religious spaces specifically. So we have temples that have been quite well preserved from 10th, 11th, 12th century in South India, which is not always the case in North India. But when it comes to patronage, we see this as a common feature in all parts of India, that yes, there were kings who were of this and that religious affiliation who sponsored construction of temples, but the same kings have also sponsored construction of temples or given grants to religious traditions which were not their own. So we have both examples of Jain kings who have built Jain temples, but who have also given donations or grants to Hindu temples, or given grants to Hindu ascetics. Similarly, we have evidences of Hindu kings or Buddhist kings who have given donations to either Hindu or Buddhist or Jain temples and ascetics and uh, monasteries, and so on.
Yes, thank you. The next question is by Saurabh Jain. He is asking if you can elaborate more on the chronology of Vaddamanu.
So evidence from Vaddamanu, the excavation at Vaddamanu was carried out by Birla Institute. Their report has been published. So if you have access to a good library, I'm sure you can find that report. Uh, the evidences discovered at Vaddamanu, as I said, were very fragmentary. The remains of a stupa were found just in terms of circular uh, alignments of stones and bricks, in form of evidence of, let's say, foundation of a stupa, and some sculptures, some fragmentary inscriptions, and so on.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. One last question, although it is not directly related to the topic that you're dealing with today, but it is a question which many of the participants may have in their minds. And one of the participant, Pradosh Biswas, has asked, what are the basic differences? Because this mistake is made not just by scholars, but also by politicians and many more people. What are the basic differences between Buddha and Jain Tirthankar images? If I happen to come across a sculpture of a seated person, especially if the face is damaged, how can I discern if the image is of Jain affiliation or not?
Uh, Very simply, a Buddha is generally shown with an upper garment, a piece of cloth worn over one shoulder. Tirthankar images, even of Shwetambar affiliation, even though they are clad, they are shown only wearing a lower garment. So if you see a sculpture wearing an upper garment, it is usually of a Buddha. Tirthankar images are shown in very specific posture. They are seated in meditation, holding hands on their lap, one on top of the other. Images of Buddha, depending on which posture is being depicted, can have some variations iconographically. You can see Buddha granting boons, or you can see Buddha, the Bhumi Sparsha Mudra, touching the soil, and so on. There are no such variations iconographically in a Tirthankar image. You will always see it in a Kayot Sarga Mudra, uh, either seated with hands folded one on top of the other on the lap, or standing very straight with hands down their body.
Yes, thank you very much, ma'am. That brings us to the end of a very active question and answer session. I now request Prashant Goyal, who is the Research Fellow of Bhagwan Sheetalnath Chair for Jain Archaeology, to present a formal vote of thanks.
Thank you, Ocean. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Bhagwan Sheetalnath Chair for Jain Archaeology, Department of Ancient Indian History, Culture and Archaeology, Deccan College Postgraduate and Research Institute, deemed to be University Pune, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to all of you for being part of today's event. A special and sincere thanks to Dr. Gauri Bedekar ma'am for delivering Professor S.D. Sankalia monthly lecture series on Jain heritage. Your lecture on patronage and spread of Jainism, archaeological and epigraphical evidence was deeply informative and thought-provoking. We are truly grateful for your presence and sharing your rich knowledge with us. I would also like to thank my fellow team member at the Bhagwan Sheetal Nath Chair for Jain Archaeology for their constant support and coordination in organizing this event smoothly. I would also like to thank Dr. Sri Netra Pandey sir, Dr. Ashok Kumar Singh sir, Dr. Narendra Parson sir, Dr. Pavan Jain madam, Dr. Gomteshwar Patil sir, and finally a warm thank you to everyone who attended this lecture today. Your presence and engagement made this session for more meaningful. Thank you once again, and we look forward to meeting you at our future events. Have a great evening. Thank you.